The state's biggest school district, already under state control, now facing a civil rights investigation by the feds. Why and what comes next? Today on the Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm David Brown. The investigation into Houston's independent school district focuses on plans to change how special education services are delivered, what some believe may amount to illegal segregation. Democrat James Talarico making big gains in the U.S. Senate race, railing against billionaires, but a new investigation finds some billionaires backing his campaign. We'll have a closer look. Also remembering the leader of a distinctly hot dance orchestra back in the 1950s. These days, he's often called the father of Tejano music. That and a whole lot more as the Texas Standard gets underway right after this. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 11th day of May, 2026. I'm David Brown. As the end of the school year is in sight, top of mind for many Texas students and their families. In Houston, home to the state's largest school district, plans for the next academic year already loom large. In fact, the Houston Independent School District is now facing a new federal civil rights investigation over how it plans to serve students with disabilities. Last week, after our partners at Houston Public Media reported on some leaked draft documents, district leaders confirmed they plan to consolidate special education services to certain campuses beginning in the next academic year. That would require students to be transferred from their neighborhood school to another school in the district that would serve as a kind of special ed hub. Well, the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is looking into whether that might amount to unconstitutional segregation. Under Section 504 in the Americans with Disabilities Act, schools are supposed to educate students with disabilities right alongside their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent appropriate, and placement decisions are supposed to be made case by case, not by broad policy. Parents have raised concerns about not being fully consulted, and all this comes against a backdrop. Remember, Houston ISD has a history of special education compliance issues, and it's under state oversight as it tries to meet state standards. Claire Partain covers the district for the Houston Chronicle. Claire, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Hey, good to be here.
What specifically seems to have triggered this investigation by the Office for Civil Rights?
Yeah, so as you mentioned a few weeks ago, there were some leaked draft documents that started to circulate on social media and in local outlets, which laid out plans to move students in certain classes to specialty schools. So naturally, parents and advocates started raising the alarm bells because students with special needs are required to spend as much time as possible in the general education classrooms.
Is it clear how many students are we talking about all special ed students? Surely not.
No. So there are about 21,000 students in special education in HISD, and this would affect about 5,000 students. And these are kids who spend a little bit more time in a self-contained classroom than in the general education classroom.
Well, I understand the district is describing these as more contained settings for specialized support. Where does that cross the line into what's prohibited by federal law, segregation?
So all of this is laid out in their individual plans. So it depends on the student what their least restrictive environment is. But that's part of what the office is concerned about as well, is that this is kind of a sweeping change, a centralized change, rather than changes made for the individual students.
I would imagine if I were a parent, I would be sort of upset that I'm hearing about this through the back door, with leaked documents online, that sort of thing. What about, were parents consulted?
Yeah, that definitely raised the alarm bells for parents. They were calling and texting their advocates and lawyers trying to figure out what was going on. Yeah, so as of Friday, now the district has told them where their school will be, but for a lot of parents, that's still too soon with just a month left in school and summer break before the next year.
How much does context matter here because of, past findings of noncompliance and HISD's current state control? Does that raise the stakes in any way in a federal review?
Right. Yeah. I'm sure, this is a particularly sensitive subject for a lot of families and people watching this. As you kind of mentioned before, HISD was investigated back in 2018 as part of the denied investigation that the Houston Chronicle did. They've been under conservatorship since 2020, which means that there's somebody overseeing the special education department and making sure they meet some goals. And then now with the takeover, I think that's where everyone's looking, especially now. They're required to meet special education compliance to exit the takeover. So everyone's eyes are definitely on this right now.
I know HISD has to comply with federal disability rules to get out from under the state takeover, but this move that prompted the federal investigation, that was made by state-appointed leaders, no?
Right, yeah. So as you said, HISD has to meet special education compliance to exit the state takeover. State-appointed Superintendent Mike Miles has said they're on track to meet that goal. So, yeah, it remains to be seen whether this will, be a violation of federal law, but it definitely complicates things as far as the takeover goes.
What's the next shoe to drop as you see it, Claire?
So the district said they're going to call every parent who's affected by this in the coming weeks. I'd expect a few meetings. Parents are also meeting and planning to go to city council meetings and the board meeting coming up on Thursday. I'm sure things will come to a head a little bit then. And as far as the investigation goes, we'll just have to see whether these plans constitute discrimination under federal law.
Yeah. Claire Partain covers the district for the Houston Chronicle, and we would encourage you to check out her reporting. We'll have a link to it at texasstandard.org. Claire, thanks so much for the reporting. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Raids by federal immigration agents may be off the front pages, but they're not out of mind for many immigrants. Arrests are up sharply in several states, up 38% in Texas since the start of the second Trump administration. Harvest Public Media contributor Sheila Brummer reports on how some neighbors have stepped in to help immigrants facing uncertainty.
ICE isn't obvious in Sioux City, Iowa, but that doesn't mean immigrants here aren't nervous. Juan agrees to meet for an interview but doesn't want to share his last name. Even though he speaks fluent English, he chooses to use Spanish so people won't recognize his voice.
Muchísima gente con ese miedo y es...
Juan says many immigrants live with constant fear, especially those with families. He sits on his living room couch with fingers interlocked, squeezing them tighter as he talks. Juan says he came to the U.S. from Guatemala more than 30 years ago in search of a better life and became a U.S. citizen a decade ago. He now owns a successful business and worries about his employees without legal status.
Porque creo que es uno de los mayores temores que tengo.
Juan calls them good people. Things may seem quiet now in Sioux City, but a growing number of allies prepares for what could come next.
Stand up! Fight back! Democracy is under attack!
Native American activist Menape Lemire has led protest marches against President Trump's immigration policies, including a recent No Kings gathering. Lemire also co-founded the Siouxland Guardians. It's a grassroots organization teaching volunteers rapid response techniques in case of possible ICE activity.
If we didn't have people trained in that, we'd never know about Renee Good or Alex Preddy. We'd never know about it because people wouldn't have known to start recording.
Lemire traveled to Minneapolis to learn more about nonviolent frontline action and brought those strategies back home. Volunteers learn how to use warning whistles, safely interact with agents, and document their actions. There's also a hotline to report ICE sightings. So far, about 30 people are in training.
So we just want to be prepared to receive that family that might come crying. They might come with really hard feelings in their heart about how America's treating them. Well, I just want to reassure them that it's not always the case.
In Oklahoma City, the Immigration Center at Western Oaks Church of the Nazarene receives calls every day from people who are stressed. Lydia Marzuk is the center's executive director.
They have had loved ones or known family or relatives that have been picked up by ICE. They're afraid to process their cases because they don't know if they will be apprehended. Even though they have a legal pathway to come, they still get very nervous.
The nonprofit provides low-cost legal services along with English and citizenship classes. Marzouk sees helping immigrants as part of her church's calling.
And Galatians 5:14 says that you love your neighbors as you love yourself. And that's what God wants us to do as a center, is to love our neighbors, serve our community, and that includes the immigrant community.
In Illinois, another nonprofit is focused on the emotional well-being of immigrants. The Western Illinois Dreamers launched a virtual support group following the ICE surge in February. Executive Director Julia Alvarez and Green started the nonprofit in 2019.
After meeting so many members of the community here and seeing how much they do with so few resources, I was really moved by that.
The organization provides services to thousands of people throughout Western Illinois, including legal advice, housing support, and financial assistance. But Alvarez and Green says many immigrants and refugees are now too afraid to travel or even leave their homes, so they started anonymous online meetings.
People are very concerned. People are very isolated, I would say.
Alvarez and Green left Venezuela more than 25 years ago. Now, as an American, she strives to offer others stability, support, and reassurance they are not alone. For Harvest Public Media, I'm Sheila Brummer.
Harvest Public Media is a collaboration of public media newsrooms in the Midwest and Great Plains, including the Texas Standard. That signal means we are joined now by Audience and Engagement Editor Wells Dunbar, who's bringing us the talk of Texas on this Monday. Hello, Wells.
Hi, David. Great to be with you. Well, school is almost out across Texas, and we want to hear, what did you learn this school year? It could be things you gleaned from class, or it could be new skills from navigating the ins and outs of your school district, the struggle to fund Texas public schools, staving off a state takeover of your school district, or solutions to problems like these. Student, parent, educator, administrator, taxpayer, whoever, we're looking to hear from you this week as part of the Talk of Texas. Here's how best to reach us. Visit texasstandard.org/talk on your smartphone and press the orange record button to leave us a voice message that we can share on air. We'll be talking about lessons from this school year and what it might mean in the fall all week long. And we want to hear your thoughts. Again, that's at texasstandard.org/talk. Go there to leave us a voice recording. And I got to say, we're already hearing from folks out there. I'll be back with some of the reactions we've received later in the show, David.
Wells Dunbar with the Talk of Texas. For children and young adults diagnosed with autism, some unique new options for support. But first, a Texan whose hot dance orchestra was so distinctive, some today call him the father of Tejano music. You know who we're talking about? This Week in Texas Music History, just around the corner as the Texas Standard continues.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the online UT High School, offering a full-time diploma program for remote, asynchronous learners throughout Texas. More at highschool.utexas.edu/tuition-free. Support for Texas Standard comes from HEB and the My HEB app, which is available for download, and shopping fresh departments like seafood, produce, bakery, and deli, and scheduling curbside pickup or home delivery. More at heb.com.
A note here for our podcast listeners. At this time on our broadcast, we usually hear our segment This Week in Texas Music History. Unfortunately, we can't play it here on our podcast because of issues with music streaming rights. However, you can find it over at texasstandard.org or check out a version on Texas Standard's Facebook or Instagram page. And as always, we encourage you to listen to the Texas Standard every weekday on your local public radio station.
I'm Laura Rice. About 1 in every 31 children in the U.S. is identified with autism spectrum disorder. That's according to data from the CDC. It's a significant increase over the past 2 decades. Experts say the rising rates are driven by factors like increased awareness of the developmental disability and better screening tools. Finding resources for autistic children and young adults can be challenging, and some families take the extra step to advocate for policy changes. Houston Public Media's Melissa Enaje reports some in the greater Houston area are finding unique programs to rely on for support.
In the city of Rosenberg, about 30 miles west of Houston, a small group of families gather in the parking lot next to the city's Railroad Museum. Their kids are part of the Train Hunters Club. And during one Saturday afternoon, they're on the hunt.
Look! Oh, here comes one right now.
What do we see, Ezra?
A train, another one.
What is it? Tell us what kind it is.
It's look!
Brian Gogler started the Train Hunters Club earlier this year after realizing his grandson Ezra had a growing obsession with trains.
Amazon!
Ezra is on the autism spectrum. Brian decided to use Ezra's curiosity not only as a way that they could bond, but also as a way to support Ezra's confidence.
Some of these kids that are on the autism spectrum, their social ways are a little different. And so somehow this helps bring them together.
Zaki Inchinelli is celebrating his son Omar's 11th birthday with colorful cupcakes and pizza. They joined the Train Hunters Club after Zaki met Brian at the Railroad Museum a couple months ago.
Every Saturday and Sunday, whether it's 90 degrees outside or whether it's negative 9 degrees, whether it's raining or sunny, we're here.
Zaki says his son Omar has signs of autism, and the club is a safe space for Omar to just be himself.
I love trains.
What do you love about them?
The horn, the EMD rumble, and the bell.
Zaki says it's more than just a club.
When he sees that I'm doing this for him, his love for me also increases. He was telling me sometimes, thank you, Daddy, for taking me to Rosenberg. I know you're tired, but thank you for taking me. And that means the world.
Being passionate about trains is common for autistic individuals, according to some health experts. The repetitiveness of the process, the sound of the train cars, the anticipation of seeing a train coming, it's predictable and provides a sense of control. As kids on the autism spectrum grow older and go on to high school, their needs change and support systems shift beyond just their parents. More than an hour away from Rosenberg is a vocational clinic at the University of Houston Clear Lake Center for Autism and Developmental Disabilities. The clinic partners with Clear Lake High School for programs that help special needs students find jobs. During an Autism Awareness Day event, high schoolers display their skills and talents. Some are in charge of the art or dance competitions. In a private room, clinicians offer free autism screenings for families. High school student Hayden Trigg greets people at the door and talks about what he wants to do after high school.
I want to become a supercar salesman. Lamborghinis, Ferraris, stuff like that.
Special education teacher Megana Yaluru says more job sites should be open to train students with disabilities before resources run out for them once they graduate.
Teaching them these job skills while they're in school, because you have teachers, you have para supports always coming with you to help them learn the job before they even get out into the community after graduation.
Lukia Somi is a research associate at the University of Houston. She says without opportunities for autistic young adults to participate in their local community, they end up being somewhat excluded.
It's not only job to make money, it is the only opportunity. Some of the adults that we have, this is the only time they get out of their house.
But not everyone with autism can leave their homes on their own or function without a caregiver. Severe forms of autism can include individuals who have an intellectual disability or those who could harm themselves. Jenny Muller is the Texas chair for the National Council on Severe Autism. She's one of the main caregivers for her son, George, who's in his mid-20s and nonverbal.
He's never said mama or dada.
The nonprofit organization lobbies for policy changes at the state and federal levels. Without more research tailored to this population's needs, Muller says disability policies would remain ill-equipped to serve families like hers.
We've got to change the system. The system is broken. All the systems are broken, and we really need to fix them.
The National Council on Severe Autism offers resources online and in person for families who might need more information on everything from Medicaid coverage to how to file for a disability license plate in Texas. Back at the Train Hunters Club, Brian Gogler says he's learning a lot about trains with his grandson. But he's also understanding what it means to love your family for who they are.
Instead of playing face-to-face like other kids, they'll stand side by side and watch a train. And they'll say, oh, we had such a good time with my friends. And when we first come, I thought, well, you didn't talk to anybody. But he did. He goes, yeah, we were together the whole time. And I began to realize, okay, it's a little bit different than I'm used to doing, but it works.
In Houston, I'm Melissa Nahe.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider that's been caring for hardworking Texans for over 30 years. More at texasmutual.com/expert partner.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Matt Harrop. Authorities in Laredo are investigating the deaths of 6 people found sealed inside a Union Pacific train. There were no other survivors inside the boxcar. Laredo police spokesman Joe Biza says it's too early to determine many other details.
What will probably likely proceed from here is an autopsy will probably take place as to determine the cause and manner of the death of the victims in this case. And from there, we'll go ahead and proceed with other facets of the investigation.
The bodies were discovered Sunday afternoon during an inspection of the rail yard. The Texas Supreme Court says the state can tax a line of oral nicotine products as tobacco. Our Toluani Yosibemoa reports the cost of those taxes may trickle down to consumers.
RJR Vapor sells Velo nicotine pouches, which contain a blend of plant matter and nicotine. The company says the nicotine comes from tobacco, but the products aren't made of tobacco. The state comptroller, which oversees tax revenue, says the products are tobacco substitutes. That makes them taxable as tobacco under state law. The Texas Supreme Court says nicotine alone isn't a tobacco substitute, but when combined with plant matter, it serves to replace tobacco and should be taxed. Sellers pay tobacco taxes, but those costs are usually built into the final retail price. RJR Vapor can still challenge the constitutionality of the tax. I'm Toluani Osibemoa in Dallas.
A homelessness tax is expected to be proposed by homeless outreach and partner organizations to Dallas County officials. Our Marina Trejan Martinez reports that the Housing Forward and the All Neighbors Coalition's homeless response tax proposal would create consistent funding.
The County Continuous Improvement Steering Committee will review the suggestion for sustainable housing and outreach funding. If it eventually lands on the Commissioner's Court agenda, county commissioners will decide whether to present it to voters in November. Committee Chair and Commissioner Andy Summerman says the tax would amount to a monthly $5 average, give or take, depending on an owner's property value.
The voters decide. Somebody will say I'm raising their taxes, and the answer is, no, I'm not. I'm letting you decide. You choose.
The tax will also be presented to Collin County. I'm Marina Trejan Martinez in Dallas.
And the city of Dallas and Parkland Health have expanded their mental health crisis response program to provide services to minors for the first time. Right Care Manager Marco Rodriguez says people can request a team when they call 911.
There's someone that you can call when it might feel like there's no one else you can call.
The program is designed to divert people from hospitals and jails when it is appropriate. I'm Matt Harrop in the Texas Newsroom.
Support for these Texas headlines comes from Texas Monthly Presents The Story, a docuseries about the state of Texas, our culture, and what's at stake from the perspective of the magazine's writers. Weekends on local PBS stations and streaming on the PBS website and app.
33 minutes past the hour, Texas Standard Time. I'm David Brown. Down in far south Texas, a massive new liquefied natural gas export terminal is rising near the Laguna Madre. In the view of those who've been pushing for it, the area's first gas export facility will reshape the region's economy. There are promises of jobs, global investment for this region of 1.4 million mostly Latino residents, but the track record isn't reassuring. Tax breaks in the billions, modest permanent employment in communities dealing with pollution, safety risks, and industries like shrimping and tourism getting squeezed. As Gage Davila of the Texas Observer reports, the question isn't just what this project could bring, but what it could cost and who ends up bearing that burden. Gage, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me.
Tell us about the Rio Grande LNG facility. What is Rio Grande LNG and what's their big plan for the RGV?
Sure. So basically, it's a facility that takes natural gas in its gas form and chills it until it turns into liquid. And then it gets exported all over the world in its liquid form and then converted back into gas and then turned into things like electricity, power. That's what it's mostly used for. Rio Grande LNG happens to be one of the largest planned projects in the world, which just happens to be in South Texas. For how big the plant is, it's sort of juxtaposed in how small of an area it is next to, which is why there's so much concern about it. There are a lot.
Let me ask you something. I'm trying to get a mental image of this, how big the plant is given the size of the area. Say more. Is there anything that you would compare it to?
Sure thing. Yeah, I think the easiest comparison for people is that it's about the size of Central Park in New York City in terms of the land mass that it stretches over. So we're talking about a very large piece of land. And this is just one facility that's going to be next to another LNG facility. Not the same size, but still very large.
Has construction already started?
It started in 2023, and I think they're about 68 to 70% done with the first phase of construction, which includes 3 of these facilities that actually liquefy the gas. There's 5 total that they're planning to do, but they're trying to build up to 10. So we're still not even seeing the full size of this facility in terms of its land mass.
When you were reporting for the Observer, you're sort of looking into past promises of permanent employment and that sort of thing. And I'm curious, if you step back, what does history tell us about what's happened with these mega projects in the past?
Sure. So last year for the Texas Observer, I had gone to communities like Freeport, Texas, and had even gone to Cameron Parish, Louisiana, where these LNG facilities were first developed and had been operating for at least a handful of years, where they said much of the same thing. They were going to bring a lot of jobs, a lot of investment inside of the community, but what it ended up doing most of the time was just sort of consuming the spaces that they were in. In the case of the Freeport LNG facility, exploding and causing a very dangerous situation that folks weren't necessarily prepared for. And it didn't necessarily pay out in the end that folks were hoping for. There's certainly people who are receiving jobs from these facilities, but not as much and not as permanently as so many would hope. Specifically in Cameron Parish, Louisiana, there are now multiple facilities in this area with more plans to expand, but it's mostly folks that, ironically, are from Texas that are working at these facilities. And there's not more than 100 or so people that actually live in the town of Cameron, Louisiana, for example, but these facilities need up to 1,500, 3,000 jobs for construction. The people simply aren't there. And so when they talk about investment and jobs for these communities and that they're going to develop the communities that they are in, often there's just simply not enough people to do so. And so what you'll end up happening is that you'll have these very large operating facilities that are making a lot of money, but not necessarily for the people that actually live in these communities.
Do I understand you, though, to say that there aren't people to take the jobs, that there are jobs available?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there will be jobs, but they've got to be filled somewhere. And so they'll come from elsewhere. And that's sort of an example that I talk about in my latest story with the Texas Observer, is that there are jobs being provided by the Rio Grande LNG facility even, but a lot of those jobs are coming from other areas, the Rio Grande Valley or other areas of Texas, not necessarily just the Laguna Madre area, which is where this facility actually is located.
We've just scratched the surface here, folks. We encourage you to check out Gage Davila's reporting for The Observer. We'll link to it, texasstandard.org. Gage, thanks so much for the update.
Thanks, David.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Half Price Books, a Texas-bred new and used bookstore, proudly supporting public media and sustainability by keeping books, music, and other media in circulation. Store locations and more information at hpb.com.
It's not just about the brisket or the ribs or the sausage or even the sides. It's the culture and people who are passionate about it. Where there's smoke, there's Daniel Vaughn, Texas Monthly Barbecue Editor. Make sure to join us Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Where There's Smoke comes from HEB.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm Laura Rice. The pool at Austin's Barton Springs was first built around 100 years ago, but the springs that feed it have been around since long before humans ever arrived in Central Texas. The limestone formations that create the natural springs were formed millions of years ago. So what have human relationships to those springs been like over the thousands of years since people came on the scene? That's a question our home station KUT received for their AT Explained project. Elizabeth McQueen dove into it.
Anyone who knows me knows I love Barton Springs. I love it in a way that I have never loved any other body of water. When I swim in Barton Springs, I feel like my whole true self. It feels like the water has magical properties, sacred properties even. So when I was choosing a question for AT Explained, I knew it was going to be Brendan Kavanaugh's.
Why were the springs sacred before Uncle Billy showed up? And what was the indigenous population's relationship with them?
By Uncle Billy, he means William Barton, the man who laid claim to the springs in 1837. He settled there with his family and the people he enslaved. Now, I assumed Brendan's question came from a place of love for the springs and general curiosity. But then he said this.
I visited the White Shaman mural, and I learned that the springs are actually part of that mural, which was astonishing to me.
This was the first time I'd ever heard of the White Shaman mural. It's a piece of rock art that sits in the desert about 220 miles west of here. Archaeologists say the White Shaman was painted around 400 BC. They call the style it's painted in the Pecos River style. And it's really big, 26 feet long and 13 feet high. Archaeologists think the mural shows a creation story. But some people think it's even more than that.
My name is Gary Bettis. I'm known best as the person who deciphered the White Shaman mural into a 2,000-year-old map.
Gary is the chief of the Kwaltecan Pakawa Nation. Gary saw the White Shaman mural for the first time in 2009. He came to believe that it not only tells a creation story, but that it's also an ancient map of Central Texas. On the mural is a pictograph. It's a curved line, think 1/3 of a circle, and coming off of the line at regular intervals are 4 matching, well, I don't know exactly what they are, but they kind of look like knives to me, with gray handles and white blades. Gary says that this pictograph represents 4 sacred springs: San Antonio Springs, San Marcos Springs, Comal Springs, and Barton Springs. All of these springs are connected to the Edwards Aquifer. He even laid out this part of the White Shaman mural on a modern map. He asked a mapping expert to help him out.
Would you take these 4 dots in this rock art and pull them off with your computer to see if they fit neatly between Barton Springs and San Antonio? Then they did. And that was it. Then we knew we were looking at a map for sure.
And Gary doesn't think it's just a map, but also a calendar, kind of like the Mayan calendar, but for hunter-gatherers. He sees this calendar as a scientific tool. There are many people who agree with Gary's interpretation of the White Shaman mural, but there are people who disagree. Dr. Harry Schaefer is a curator of archaeology at the Whitty Museum, which owns the White Shaman site.
We have a really good handle on the archaeology of the Lower Pecos region and Central Texas. And there's no tie in Lower Pecos to Central Texas.
So does the White Shaman mural depict 4 springs in Central Texas, including Barton Springs? Depends on whose science you believe. Harry Schaefer's science says no. Gary Perez's science says yes. What we do know for sure is that people have lived around Barton Springs for millennia. And they were there way before the White Shaman mural was even painted.
The archaeological record for the Barton Springs area goes back at least 13,000 years. There were certainly people here long before the early historical records show.
This is Dr. Michael Collins. He's an archaeologist who worked in Central Texas. He was interviewed at Barton Springs back in 2008 by Karen Kocher, a documentary filmmaker in Austin. But the people Collins is talking about, they weren't the same people who lived there by the time European colonists arrived.
So we don't even know the names of those groups whose archaeological record fills the 12 or so thousand years before arrival of Europeans.
Did these people have a sacred relationship with the springs? Maybe. We may never know the exact details, but we do know something about the indigenous people who came later. When William Barton arrived at the springs, we know that there were Comanche, Tonkawa, Caddo, Lipan Apache, and Qualtecan people in the area, among others. We know some of these people had a sacred relationship with the springs, but the accounts we have are secondhand, from colonists. Barton lived in Austin during the Texas Republic, when many of the tribes that lived here were killed or forcibly removed. And Native Americans were erased in other ways. Here's Craig Campbell, an anthropology professor at UT.
So under the Texas Republic, at one point, there was a law that was passed that essentially arbitrarily turned a number of indigenous groups into Mexicans. That's what they said. They're like, you're no longer indigenous, you're Mexicans.
And this genocidal campaign worked, at least in our collective imagination as a state.
In Texas, there's this sort of assumption there's no more Indians here, when in fact we have this, absolutely huge population of indigenous people that rarely gets recognized.
Texas actually has the 5th largest population of indigenous people in the country. According to the U.S. Census, there are over 700,000 people in Texas who identify, at least in part, as indigenous. Yet we don't think of ourselves as Indian country. But like I said, there are a lot of indigenous people living in Texas right now, and some of them have a sacred relationship with these springs. Every August, a group of mostly women make a pilgrimage to the 4 sacred springs. At each site, they commune with the water and offer prayers.
I'm alive because of the water. So in a way, is that giving back, that offering, that love, like, I'm here, I see you, thank you. That's all I can offer is me.
That was Diana Dos Santos. She's gone on the pilgrimage for the last 3 years. They start at San Antonio Springs at dawn and end up at Barton Springs in the afternoon. Diana told me it's a long day, but it doesn't really feel long.
The whole day feels like it just merges into a short moment, because when you're in the water, when you're, praying with all these women, is like the whole world, the past, the present, everything just merges into one moment. And when you're present there with your prayer, with your medicine, with the other sisters, it's incredible. It's magical.
These days, most of us think of Barton Springs as a really cold swimming pool. But maybe you're like me, and when you're swimming, you feel something else. You feel connected to yourself, to the people around you, to the animals swimming with you, to the plants grazing you as you swim by, to the trees overhead and the sky above you. Now you know that human beings have been in a relationship with Barton Springs for thousands of years, sometimes a sacred relationship. And you know that there are still people who see these springs as a holy place. So maybe now you'll think about your own relationship to the springs. Even if you never thought to pray or give offerings to those cold waters, do you think Barton Springs is sacred? I'm Elizabeth McQueen in Austin.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Casa. For a child in foster care, small moments today can have a big impact tomorrow. More on how lending time and support can help make a difference at becomeacasa.org.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. State Representative James Talarico, the Round Rock Democrat who's running for U.S. Senate, has spent a lot of time on the campaign trail speaking out against big money in politics. Go over to his website and you'll see this quote, "Billionaire mega donors aren't just buying yachts and jets, they're buying power, and they're using that power to rig our political system," end quote. But billionaires are part of the base powering Talarico's campaign. That's according to new reporting by John Moritz, chief political reporter for the Austin American-Statesman. John, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Always glad to be here.
You recently took a look at Talarico campaign's fundraising. Where's his money coming from? What'd you find?
Well, we should differentiate his campaign from the PAC, which by law is separate from his campaign, and they're not allowed to coordinate. But the PAC is raising a fair amount of money from very deep-pocketed individuals around Texas and beyond. Some of them are billionaires. Some of them might not be billionaires, but they certainly have tremendous means at their disposal, and they're contributing to that PAC, and that PAC is basically working to help Talarico, although not coordinating their efforts with Talarico, if that makes sense.
Oh, I understand the line that you're drawing there. Yeah. For the benefit of some listeners who don't closely follow politics, let's talk a bit about why there is this bright line between campaign fundraising and super PAC money. Why is there such a focus on that?
Well, under federal law, federal campaigns, U.S. Senate, the President, Congress, they can only raise up to like $3,500 from an individual per election cycle. But these PACs and super PACs, on the other hand, are not under those restrictions. So donors can be far more generous if they are giving to these other outside third-party organizations.
There's been certainly among Democrats a kind of push in some quarters for politicians to turn down this PAC money. How easy would that be as a practical matter for Talarico to turn it down? Is that even feasible?
Well, he tells us by law he can't coordinate with them. I suppose he could disavow their ads, saying, oh, no, that's not me, that's them. I wish they wouldn't do that. But so far, he hasn't drawn that particular line in the sand. But on the other hand, he has called for the banning of these super PACs and the banning of corporate PACs. Whether he could get that through the Senate were he elected is another matter. But that's sort of the line he draws to separate himself from the Republican candidates, Senator Cornyn and Attorney General Paxton, who also have super PACs and who also have very wealthy donors helping them along.
Yeah, I guess this sort of gets to a sort of arms race that you have in any political campaign. If one candidate is welcoming PAC money with open arms, what are you going to do? Say no? Isn't that what you hear a lot as you cover this story?
Exactly. In fact, the director of the super PAC told me is like, we're aware of his stance on these super PACs. We're aware of his message. We like most of it. Our donors like most of it. But you can't go into battle with one hand tied behind your back in modern politics, especially in the state the size of Texas, where we have 20 very expensive media markets, to purchase advertising and try to get your message out. So that's kind of the yin and the yang of the super PAC.
Yeah, that's well said. But I'm curious where this money's going, because I know that there are a lot of ads that are running on television, but a lot more people are not going to television for their entertainment anymore. A lot of people are just sort of, online 24/7.
Yes, and a fair amount of these ads are digital ads. They might appear online, but a lot of people watch, YouTube on their TV, so it's hard for an ordinary viewer to differentiate. And much of the money that the super PAC helping Talarico was spent during the primary when he was being challenged quite vigorously by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas.
That's the voice of John Moritz. He is chief political reporter for the Austin American-Statesman, and we encourage you to check out his reporting. We'll have a link to this full story over at texasstandard.org. John, fascinating stuff. Thanks again for joining us on The Standard.
Thanks for having me.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. He said he'd be back. Wells Dunbar, that is. He's our audience and engagement editor, and he's got more of the talk of Texas, I bet. Wells?
As advertised. Great to be back, David. As I mentioned, the school year is coming to a close in Texas, and before everyone scatters for the summer, we want to hear from Texans about something they're taking away from this past year. What did the school year teach them? Maybe, as a student, it was an actual lesson from the classroom. Maybe, as a parent, it was learning how hard it is to get answers from a school district. Or maybe as a citizen, it was figuring out how school funding works in Texas. or doesn't. Maybe you found yourself dealing with teacher shortages, book debates, state oversight, special education concerns, or you're just trying to keep up with everything changing around public schools right now. Whatever your connection to education, student, parent, teacher, principal, staffer, or just someone paying attention, we want your perspective for the Talk of Texas. Here's how to send it in. Grab your phone, head to texasstandard.org/talk and tap the record button to leave us a voice message so we can play it on the air. Well, over on our Facebook page, we're hearing from folks already. Christina is focused on the politics. She writes that I learned that working in coalition to put pro-public education people on school boards works. She cites the story there in Cy-Fair ISD. She says voters outed 2 incumbent board members and won a 3rd seat outright by working in a broad coalition of pro-public ed organizations, PACs, unions, clubs, and educators to choose a slate and get them elected. The story looks a little different in Houston ISD, as we've reported extensively on the show, that school district, the subject of a state takeover. And there, Megan Lapari Rasmussen has some thoughts to share. She says Houston ISD continues to find new ways to make life miserable, in her words. She says, we're weeks away from the end of the school year and have learned that our juniors and seniors are no longer to be exempt from any finals because the district wants to determine teacher pay based on final exam grades. She calls it an example of the state administration moving the goalposts, and notes that her junior with 5 AP classes is thrilled. Well, I can imagine. Yes, we're definitely at that time there at the end of the year. And, just altogether, another great example of how we're looking back at the school year through these individual experiences, what's working, what maybe isn't working, what surprised folks, and where they think Texas schools are heading into the fall. And of course, there's plenty of contrary explanations out there and opinions as well. Jolynn Clifton says, altogether, the public school system is a sinking ship. Smart ones are pulling their kids out to homeschool. So, of course, between homeschooling and charter schools, so many other options. And again, we want to explore it all. Go to texasstandard.org/talk because we want to hear these voices and bring them into the conversation, David.
Indeed. Alas, we're out of time for today's big broadcast, but you can keep up with the news 24/7 and reach out to Wells over at texasstandard.org.
Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com. Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Wooldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.